There are moments when the world seems to lower its voice without warning, not because something dramatic has happened, but because something inside has shifted. The noise fades, conversations feel distant, and even familiar sounds lose their urgency. In these moments, silence does not arrive as peace, it arrives as a question, one that lingers softly, asking nothing directly, yet waiting patiently for attention. Silence often begins this way, unnoticed at first, a pause between thoughts, a breath held a little longer than usual, a feeling that something important is happening beneath the surface, even if no one else can see it. They continue speaking, moving, reacting. Life goes on as it always has, but inside there is a quiet space opening, and it does not demand to be filled. This kind of silence can feel uncomfortable. It strips away distractions. It removes the familiar rhythms that normally keep the mind busy. Without noise, there is nowhere to hide from oneself. Thoughts once pushed aside begin to drift forward. Feelings that were postponed begin to surface gently, not to accuse but to be acknowledged. There is a temptation in moments like this to rush back into sound, to speak quickly, to react, to explain oneself before being asked. Silence can feel like vulnerability, as though staying quiet means being unseen or forgotten, and yet there is something deeply honest about it. Silence does not perform, it does not impress, it simply exists. They may not notice this quiet change at all, or if they do, they may misunderstand it. Silence is often mistaken for absence, for weakness, for uncertainty. Silence has its own language, one that does not rely on approval. It is the language of someone who is listening, not to the world, but inwardly. In the beginning, this quiet can feel heavy, like standing alone in an empty room after everyone has left. There is a sense of waiting, though it is not clear for what. Perhaps for clarity, perhaps for relief, or perhaps just for permission to stop reacting for a moment. Time moves differently in silence. Without constant response, moments stretch. Thoughts slow down. Emotions that once felt overwhelming begin to soften. Not because they are solved, but because they are no longer being resisted. Silence allows feelings to exist without being judged or corrected. There is a subtle strength forming here, though it does not announce itself. It is not the strength of control or dominance. It is the strength of restraint, of choosing not to fill every space with words, of allowing meaning to settle rather than forcing it into shape. In this quiet, something important becomes clear. Not everything requires a response. Not every misunderstanding needs correction. Not every feeling demands expression. Some truths reveal themselves only when given space, and silence provides that space generously. This is not the silence of withdrawal, but of awareness. A pause that carries intention. A stillness that listens more than it speaks. It is the beginning of a different way of being, one that does not rush to prove itself, one that does not fear being still. As the world continues in its usual rhythm, this quiet remains steady and observant. It does not seek attention. It does not ask to be understood. It simply holds its place, reminding the one who listens that inner power does not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it enters quietly, and everything begins to change from there. As the quiet settles in, something else begins to make itself known. It is not loud, and it does not demand immediate attention, but it carries weight, an emotional heaviness that lingers beneath the surface, shaped by words never spoken and reactions deliberately withheld. Silence, once simply a pause, now becomes a space where feelings gather. There is a particular discomfort that comes from not responding. The mind revisits moments again and again, wondering if something should have been said differently or at all. Thoughts circle gently but persistently, like waves returning to shore. In silence, emotions are no longer blurred by noise. They stand clearly, waiting to be acknowledged. They might assume that quiet means indifference, that no response means nothing was felt. But inside, there is movement. There is reflection. There is the slow recognition of feelings that were once hurried past. Silence does not erase emotion, it magnifies it, bringing even the smallest feelings into clearer focus. This is where the weight becomes noticeable, not heavy in a crushing way, but in the way something meaningful rests on the heart. The absence of reaction creates room for doubt, for self-questioning. Was silence the right choice? Should understanding have been defended? Should feelings have been explained before being misunderstood? The discomfort grows not because silence is wrong, but because it asks for patience. It refuses immediate relief. There is no release valve in quiet moments, no instant reassurance. Instead, there is waiting, a gentle endurance, an invitation to sit with emotions rather than escape them. At times, this can feel isolating. Without outward expression, it may seem as though these feelings belong only to the one who carries them. They continue on, speaking freely, unaware of the internal struggle unfolding in stillness. Silence can feel like carrying an invisible weight while appearing unchanged. Yet, within this discomfort, something subtle begins to happen. By not reacting, emotions are given time to mature. Initial impulses soften. Anger loses its sharp edges. Hurt becomes clearer, more defined, and less reactive. What once demanded immediate expression now seeks understanding instead. There is a quiet strength required to remain here, to resist the urge to break the silence, simply to feel lighter, to trust that clarity will come, even if slowly. Emotional discipline does not remove pain, instantly, but it reshapes it. It turns raw feeling into insight. In these moments, silence becomes a mirror. It reflects not only what was felt, but why it was felt. It reveals patterns long unnoticed, old sensitivities, familiar reactions. And in doing so, it offers a rare opportunity to understand oneself more deeply. The discomfort does not vanish right away. It lingers, teaching patience, teaching the value of restraint, teaching that not every feeling must be acted upon to be honored. Some emotions need space more than expression. As time passes, the weight begins to shift. It no longer presses inward with the same intensity. Instead, it settles, becoming part of a growing inner awareness. Silence remains, but it feels less like a burden and more like a companion. This is the quiet work that happens unseen, the slow shaping of emotional strength, the realization that inner power is not built by constant reaction, but by the courage to remain still when everything inside wants to respond. In the space that silence creates, another feeling begins to surface. It is the quiet ache of being seen, yet not truly known, of standing present, attentive, aware, while others form conclusions from a distance. Silence, once chosen for clarity, now becomes the ground on which misunderstanding quietly grows. They observe the stillness and fill it with their own interpretations. Without words to guide them, they decide what the silence must mean. Perhaps it is disinterest, perhaps ride, perhaps weakness. The absence of explanation invites assumption, and assumptions spread easily where clarity is withheld. There is a subtle loneliness in this, not the loneliness of being physically alone, but of feeling emotionally separate while surrounded by others. To know one's own intentions clearly, yet realize they are unseen, creates a quiet tension within. It asks a difficult question: is it necessary to be understood, or is it enough to remain true? Silence tests this boundary gently but persistently. Each moment of misunderstanding carries the temptation to speak, to correct the story being told in quiet glances and unspoken judgments. The mind imagines how a few carefully chosen words could change everything, how easily the weight of misinterpretation could be lifted, and yet silence remains, not as stubbornness, but as observation. There is something revealing about watching how they respond when no explanation is offered, how quickly narratives form, how certainty appears without evidence. In this, silence becomes a teacher, showing not only how others perceive, but how little control one truly has over that perception. This realization can be unsettling. It challenges the desire to manage impressions, to be seen in a particular light. Silence strips away that control. It leaves only what is real without decoration. The truth, even when misunderstood, stands on its own. There is a quiet dignity in enduring this, in allowing misunderstanding to exist. Without rushing to erase it, it requires trust, not in how one is seen, but in who one knows oneself to be. Self-respect grows here, in the decision to value inner clarity over external approval. They may continue to misunderstand, some may grow distant, others may speak with confidence about what they believe the silence represents. The urge to respond does not disappear, but it changes. It becomes less about defending oneself and more about preserving inner peace. Over time, something unexpected happens. The sting of being misunderstood begins to soften, not because it stops happening, but because its importance fades. When self-understanding deepens, external misinterpretation loses its power. Silence no longer feels like exposure. It feels like protection. In this space, emotional discipline strengthens quietly. The ability to remain composed in the face of assumption becomes a form of inner stability. There is less need to explain, less urgency to clarify. What matters most has already been settled within. Being misunderstood is not comfortable, but it is clarifying. It reveals where one's sense of worth truly resides, in the voices of others or in the quiet confidence of one's own awareness. Silence, in its own way, answers this question without words. And so, the stillness remains. Not empty, not passive, but full of quiet resolve. The world may never fully understand the reasons behind the silence, but understanding oneself becomes enough. In that realization, something steadies, and the path forward feels clearer, even without explanation. With time, silence begins to change its shape. What once felt like an absence slowly reveals itself as a presence. In the quiet left behind by unspoken words and unchosen reactions, something subtle begins to form. It is not sudden, and it does not arrive with certainty, but it grows steadily, like understanding finding its way through stillness. At first, the mind resists this space. It searches for conclusions, for clarity that feels finished and secure, but silence does not offer answers quickly. Instead, it allows insight to rise naturally, without force. Thoughts begin to settle, no longer racing toward reaction, but drifting toward meaning. This is where the lesson reveals itself, not through effort, but through patience. In the absence of noise, patterns become visible. Old habits of reacting, familiar emotional triggers, the ways in which energy was once spent trying to be seen, heard, or understood. Silence exposes these patterns gently, without judgment. There is a realization here that feels both simple and profound. Much of what once demanded immediate response did not require it at all. The urgency was learned, not necessary. Silence makes room for this understanding to surface, showing how often reactions were driven by discomfort rather than truth. They may still misinterpret the quiet. The world may continue at its usual pace. But inside, a shift has taken place. The need to respond has loosened its grip. Not because feelings have disappeared, but because they are now understood more clearly. In this stillness, emotional discipline begins to feel less like restraint and more like wisdom. Choosing not to react is no longer an act of suppression, but of alignment. Words are weighed, responses are considered. Silence becomes a conscious choice rather than a default reaction. There is a deep sense of grounding that emerges here, a feeling of standing firmly within oneself, regardless of external movement. This is not detachment from life, but engagement on one's own terms. Silence provides a boundary where clarity can exist without interruption. The realization continues to unfold quietly. Not everything deserves access to one's emotional energy. Not every situation requires participation. Silence offers discernment, allowing one to see where attention truly belongs. This understanding brings with it a calm confidence. There is less fear of being misunderstood, less urgency to correct perceptions. The internal compass feels steady, guided by awareness rather than impulse. Silence becomes a place of refuge, not retreat. What emerges from this space is not distance from others, but closeness to oneself, a clearer sense of values, a deeper respect for inner limits. Silence teaches that strength does not always assert itself outwardly. Often it holds quietly, preserving energy for what truly matters. As this realization settles in, the quiet feels different, lighter, purposeful. It no longer carries the weight of uncertainty, but the steadiness of understanding. Silence has done its work, not by speaking, but by allowing truth to rise naturally. And in this gentle clarity, there is no need to rush forward. The lesson is already present, held softly within. The quiet remains not as emptiness, but as a foundation, solid, patient, and deeply rooted. There comes a moment when silence is no longer accidental. It is chosen, not out of fear and not as avoidance, but as a quiet recognition of one's own boundaries. This choice does not announce itself. It arrives softly, almost unnoticed, yet it carries a deep sense of intention. The impulse to react still appears. Words gather at the edge of thought, ready to be released. The body remembers old patterns, the need to explain, to defend, to respond before being misunderstood further. But something has changed. There is now a pause between feeling and action, and within that pause, awareness resides. They may continue to provoke intentionally or not. Situations arise that once would have demanded immediate response. Silence, in these moments, feels unfamiliar again, not because it is new, but because it is now deliberate. Choosing not to answer the noise requires trust. Trust in one's own clarity, and trust that not everything needs resolution in words. This choice is not about winning or losing. It is about self-respect. By remaining silent, emotional energy is preserved rather than scattered. The mind stays clear. The heart remains steady. Silence becomes a form of protection, not against others, but against unnecessary internal disturbance. There is a quiet dignity in this restraint. It does not seek validation. It does not aim to prove anything. It simply honors the understanding that reacting to everything diminishes the value of response itself. Silence, chosen thoughtfully, restores meaning to speech. They may mistake this quiet for submission, or assume it reflects uncertainty, but the choice to remain silent often requires more strength than speaking. It asks for patience, for confidence, for the ability to stand firmly without external reinforcement. As silence becomes intentional, the inner dialogue softens. There is less replaying of imagined conversations, less anticipation of arguments that may never happen. The mind begins to rest. What once felt like tension now feels like space. This space allows perspective to deepen. Emotions are observed rather than acted upon. Reactions are felt fully, then released without expression. Silence becomes an internal practice, a way of listening more carefully to what truly matters. Over time, this deliberate quiet reshapes relationships with the world. Interactions become simpler, boundaries clearer. There is less entanglement in unnecessary conflict. Silence creates a subtle distance that allows clarity without separation. The choice not to respond is not permanent withdrawal. It is discernment, knowing when words add value and when they only add noise. Silence teaches patience, reminding that timing matters as much as content. In this chosen stillness, self-trust strengthens. Decisions are guided by inner alignment rather than external pressure. The need for immediate approval fades. What remains is a steady sense of self, grounded and composed. Silence, once feared, now feels empowering. It is no longer an empty space waiting to be filled, but a presence that holds firm. Choosing not to answer the noise becomes an act of quiet leadership within oneself, and in this calm restraint there is freedom. Freedom from constant reaction, freedom from the expectations of others, freedom to move through life with intention rather than impulse. Silence stands not as absence but as a deliberate, powerful choice, one that honors inner clarity above all else. As silence continues to be chosen, something begins to change beneath the surface. It is not dramatic, and it does not reveal itself all at once. Growth through restraint is slow, almost invisible, like roots forming underground. Nothing appears different from the outside, yet within, strength is quietly taking shape. Restraint asks for consistency. Each time a reaction is withheld, something is reinforced. Not suppression, but awareness. The emotions still rise, just as before, but they are met with steadiness rather than urgency. Over time, this steadiness becomes familiar. What once felt difficult, LT begins to feel natural. They may never notice this inner shift. To them, silence looks the same as it always has. But internally, the experience is entirely different. There is less turmoil, fewer emotional spikes. The mind no longer rushes toward defense or explanation. Instead, it observes, allowing situations to pass without attaching to them. This restraint begins to refine perception. Without immediate reaction, details become clearer, intentions are easier to read, emotional responses feel less overwhelming because they are no longer in control. Silence creates a buffer where understanding can develop before action is taken. There is a sense of maturity that grows here, not the kind that seeks recognition, but the kind that feels settled. Emotional discipline stops feeling like effort and starts feeling like alignment. The inner world becomes quieter, not because life is calmer, but because reactions no longer dominate attention. Restraint also teaches patience with oneself. There is no rush to resolve every feeling immediately. Emotions are allowed to unfold at their own pace. Some fade quickly, others linger, asking to be understood rather than acted upon. Silence provides the space for this understanding to emerge naturally. As this continues, confidence deepens, not the loud confidence that asserts itself outwardly, but a quiet assurance that does not depend on response. There is trust in one's ability to remain composed, even when circumstances are challenging. This trust becomes a steady companion. They may still test boundaries intentionally or unknowingly, but restraint holds firm, not rigid, not defensive, simply present. Silence becomes a stable ground, unaffected by external shifts. What once felt like pressure now feels distant, unable to disturb inner balance. Through restraint, priorities clarify. Energy is no longer spent on every passing moment. Attention becomes selective. What truly matters receives care. What does not is allowed to pass without resistance. This discernment brings a sense of ease that was once unfamiliar. There is also humility in this growth. Silence does not seek to dominate or correct. It does not need to be right. It allows others to be as they are, without interference. In doing so, it preserves inner peace while respecting external freedom. Over time, restraint reshapes identity. One is no longer defined by reactions, but by presence, by the ability to remain grounded regardless of circumstance. Silence becomes less of a response and more of a way of being. This growth is not rushed. It unfolds quietly, reinforced with each moment of restraint. There is no finish line, no final achievement, just a deepening sense of inner stability that continues to strengthen with time. And in this steady, patient growth, silence proves its value, not as avoidance but as cultivation, not as weakness but as quiet power. Through restraint, something enduring is built, calm, resilient, and firmly rooted within. There is a moment when the noise of the world no longer feels as close as it once did. It is still there, moving, shifting, unfolding as it always has. But something inside has settled, creating a gentle distance between outer chaos and inner experience. This is where peace begins to speak, not in words, but in feeling. The mind, once restless, now moves more slowly. Thoughts arrive without urgency and leave without resistance. What once demanded attention now passes quietly through awareness. Silence has softened the edges of experience, allowing life to be felt without being overwhelming. They may continue in familiar patterns, reacting quickly, speaking often, filling every pause, but there is no pull to follow. Peace does not require agreement or participation. It exists independently, rooted in the decision to remain grounded. In this state, clarity becomes effortless. Situations are seen for what they are, without added emotion or interpretation. There is less attachment to outcome, less need to control direction. Silence has created a lens through which reality appears simpler, more honest. Emotional responses still arise, but they are gentle now. They do not surge or demand expression. They are acknowledged, felt, and allowed to move on. Peace is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to experience it without being overtaken. There is a subtle joy in this steadiness. Not excitement, not elation, but a quiet contentment. A sense of being at ease within oneself. This peace does not depend on external conditions. It remains present even when circumstances are uncertain. They may sense this change without understanding it. Something feels different, less reactive, less accessible. But peace does not explain itself. It simply remains, unaffected by perception. This inner calm creates space for deeper awareness. Moments are experienced fully, without anticipation or regret. Attention rests in the present, unburdened by the need to respond or prepare. Silence has opened a door to presence. There is also compassion here. With peace comes understanding of others, of oneself. Reactions are no longer taken personally. Intentions are viewed with clarity rather than assumption. Silence has softened judgment, allowing empathy to grow. Time feels different in this state. It stretches gently, no longer rushed by urgency. There is patience with unfolding events, trust in process. Peace allows life to move at its natural pace. This calm does not announce victory. It does not claim superiority. It simply exists, steady and unassuming. It is felt more than noticed. A quiet companion that remains regardless of circumstance. Through this peace, silence finds its voice. Not as speech, but as understanding. Not as explanation, but as acceptance. The inner world feels balanced, aligned, whole, and in this space there is no need to prove strength. It is already present, woven into every quiet moment. Peace speaks softly, reminding the deepest power is often the calmest, steady, patient, and quietly enduring. There is a moment when the noise of the world no longer feels as close as it once did. It is still there, moving, shifting, unfolding as it always has. But something inside has settled, creating a gentle distance between outer chaos and inner experience. This is where peace begins to speak, not in words but in feeling. The mind, once restless, now moves more slowly. Thoughts arrive without urgency and leave without resistance. What once demanded attention now passes quietly through awareness. Silence has softened the edges of experience, allowing life to be felt without being overwhelming. They may continue in familiar patterns, reacting quickly, speaking often, filling every pause, but there is no pull to follow. Peace does not require agreement or participation. It exists independently, rooted in the decision to remain grounded. In this state, clarity becomes effortless. Situations are seen for what they are, Without added emotion or interpretation, there is less attachment to outcome, less need to control direction. Silence has created a lens through which reality appears simpler, more honest. Emotional responses still arise, but they are gentle now. They do not surge or demand expression. They are acknowledged, felt, and allowed to move on. Peace is not the absence of emotion, but the ability to experience it without being overtaken. There is a subtle joy in this steadiness. Not excitement, not elation, but a quiet contentment, a sense of being at ease within oneself. This peace does not depend on external conditions. It remains present even when circumstances are uncertain. They may sense this change without understanding it. Something feels different, less reactive, less accessible, but peace does not explain itself. It simply remains unaffected by perception. This inner calm creates space for deeper awareness. Moments are experienced fully, without anticipation or regret. Attention rests in the present, unburdened by the need to respond or prepare. Silence has opened a door to presence. There is also compassion here. With peace comes understanding of others, of oneself. Reactions are no longer taken personally. Intentions are viewed with clarity rather than assumption. Silence has softened judgment, allowing empathy to grow. Time feels different in this state. It stretches gently, no longer rushed by urgency. There is patience with unfolding events, trust in process. Peace allows life to move at its natural pace. This calm does not announce victory. It does not claim superiority. It simply exists, steady and unassuming. It is felt more than noticed. A quiet companion that remains regardless of circumstance. Through this peace, silence finds its voice. Not as speech, but as understanding. Not as explanation, but as acceptance. The inner world feels balanced, aligned, whole. And in this space, there is no need to prove strength. It is already present, woven into every quiet moment. Peace speaks softly, reminding that the deepest power is often the calmest, steady, patient, and quietly enduring. Eventually, silence no longer feels like something being practiced. It becomes something lived. There is a sense of standing quietly within oneself, not waiting, not withholding, simply present. The world continues its movement, its noise, its shifting demands, but none of it feels intrusive anymore. There is a calm distance, not created by withdrawal, but by wholeness. Being quiet now feels natural, not as a rule, not as discipline, but as alignment. Words arise when they are needed, and when they do, they carry weight. When they are not needed, silence holds its place without effort. There is no tension in this balance, no inner debate, just clarity. They may still look on with curiosity or confusion. Some may never understand the quiet strength that is formed. But understanding is no longer required. There is no urge to correct perceptions or adjust presence to fit expectation. What exists within feels complete on its own. This sense of completion is not pride. It is not detachment. It is a quiet self-respect that does not need reinforcement. A knowing that one's worth is not measured by reaction, explanation, or visibility. Silence has become a home rather than a shelter. There is stability here. A feeling of standing firmly without bracing against anything. Challenges still appear, emotions still move through, but nothing feels threatening to the core. The inner ground feels solid, unaffected by passing storms. In this state, life is met gently. Moments are allowed to unfold without pressure. Conversations happen without urgency. Decisions are made without inner noise. Silence has shaped a way of being that is steady, thoughtful, and calm. There is also freedom in this quiet strength, freedom from the need to be right, freedom from the habit of defending, freedom from the exhaustion of constant response. What remains is presence, attentive, grounded, and unshaken. The silence now carries warmth rather than distance. It allows connection without entanglement, care without overextension, understanding without absorption. This balance feels sustainable, something that can be carried forward without effort. Time continues to move, but it no longer feels chased. There is patience with oneself and with life. The quiet has taught how to wait without restlessness, how to trust without certainty, how to remain open without losing balance. Standing whole does not mean standing apart. It means standing centered. A quiet confidence that does not need to announce itself. A strength that does not rise to meet every challenge because it does not feel challenged. Silence, once chosen carefully, now simply exists. It is no longer noticed as absence or restraint. It is presence. It is grounding. It is a steady awareness that remains regardless of circumstance. In this quiet wholeness, there is no final statement to make, no conclusion to declare. Life continues, and so does the stillness within, not passive, not withdrawn, just deeply rooted. And from this place, whatever comes next can be met calmly, without hurry, without resistance, without noise.